Hey guys, welcome back to Empire Prints. Today we are making a 212th Airborne Trooper helmet. This helmet is printed in PLA on a Bamboo Lab P1S, and the files are from Galactic Armory. They are paid files, but these are some amazing Airborne Trooper helmet files. I had to split it up for my printer with the dome, and then the back and the front were split as well. So this printed in 3 parts, and then all the details will be added on later for ease of sanding. So let's get into it. Before we can get to sanding, the first thing we have to do is connect all these pieces together. And what I like to do is I like to take some tape and I like to tape them up and get a really nice perfect alignment, because that's going to help out with sanding later and filling in these seam lines. So just take your soldering iron, go along all the inside seams and get it nice and strong. You want a secure connection, because if there is any flex when you go to fill in those seam lines later, they're actually going to crack. And I did have that happen, so I had to come back with my soldering iron and fix that. So just make sure you take your time, get really good alignment, make sure to solder those connections nice and tight. Now before we start with any of our fillers or primers, I like to come in with the mouse sander with the 220 grit pad, and I like to demolish these layer lines. Getting about 90% of these imperfections out. Make sure to really go over those seam lines as well, get them nice and flush. This is going to make sanding a heck of a lot easier. And you just want to go over the whole thing, take your time. The more time you put into this, the better results you're going to get. And then I like to come in with some 220 grit sandpaper and just get all the nooks and crannies that the mouse sander couldn't reach. Once we're done with the mouse sander, we can come in with our Bondo acetone mixture, which I like to get a very watery consistency as to not get brush strokes or drips. Those are just a lot harder to sand when this is a thicker concentration. So I like to come in and keep it very thin, very light. And then we can come in with our Bondo without the acetone and push it into all those seam lines. Get this nice and uniform, one piece like it was forged in the Star Wars galaxy. We want it to look very realistic, so make sure to really push in that Bondo. We may have to do multiple layers of this, it just depends on the helmet. And then we come in with some 400 grit wet sand, and this thing's ready for filler primer. For the filler primer I'm just using the normal Rust-Oleum filler primer. This stuff is great on filling in those smaller imperfections and getting a nice smooth layer to lay down for paint. And then once that's done, we just rinse and repeat that step as many times as need be, while putting more Bondo on the seam lines if they crack or if they are not flush with the rest of the helmet. It's a long process, but the more effort you put into this, the better the result you're going to get. For the white paint I just used Ultra Matte White by Rust-Oleum. This stuff is what I use on all my clone helmets, and it dries really fast. I love this stuff. And then unfortunately, as I said earlier in the video, all my seam lines had cracked. It was just causing from flexing of the print. I did not solder the seam lines correctly, so I had to go back in with my soldering iron and fix those. It's not a big deal. You just got to put some more Bondo on, sand it back down, and recoat that white, and you'll have a totally smooth helmet. Then onto a very easy tape job for the Airborne Trooper. All he has is 2 orange stripes on the front of his dome, and then these 2 orange chunks on the side by the main vent. Very easy tape job, just take your time. I'm using yellow frog tape. This stuff is for delicate surfaces. I always am prone to ripping up the white paint, and I did do that on this helmet, as you can see on that left side. It's not a big deal. We can cover it up with some white paint or some touch-up, and these guys are very heavily weathered, so I wasn't too concerned with it. For the orange, I'm using Vallejo's Amaranth Red. This stuff laid down great. I was really happy with the color. And you will see in most of my videos, I'm using an airbrush over spray paints for these decoration colors, I guess you could say, on these clone helmets. I just prefer how thin they lay and how flat they are compared to spray paint. And the main reason I use an airbrush is mostly because I can't find a flat spray paint with a lot of these colors. It's either a satin or a gloss, which if you don't have an airbrush is a great option. I just prefer the flat matte look, and it's just easier to weather for me. And then once we're done ripping the tape off, we can move on to the details. I like to leave the detail parts off the helmet until we hand paint them with some matte black, and then I move into painting the gray stripe and the black brim on the back of the helmet. I like to hand paint these. You can tape them off in spray paint. I just prefer the efficiency and how fast it is to just hand paint them. I did have to put some tape when I was painting the black brim, as I was worried I was going to get some leakage, but entirely up to you if you like to hand paint these or spray paint them. After the details are painted, I can come in with my first step of my weathering technique, which is just to take some 400 grit sandpaper and scuff up all the orange markings, and then come in with my X-Acto blade for some more detailed controlled scratches. Before I start my weather wash, I just wanted to glue on all these detail parts and make sure they're nice and secure, as this is just going to make weathering everything nice and uniform much easier. For the weather wash, I just like to take some very cheap black acrylic paint, and I like to water it down pretty heavily. You don't want this stuff too thick. It just depends on how dark you want this weather wash to be. I went for a medium tone on this, as these airborne troopers are pretty dang dirty in Revenge of the Sith, but it's up to you. And then I just like to dab it off with a paper towel. Make sure you're not dragging the paper towel, as it will leave streaks and it'll look very unrealistic. For my favorite step of the weathering process, I like to use some pastel chalks watered down with some Mod Podge. This gives an amazing textured dirt look, and you can actually feel the texture of the chalk. I scrape it up with an X-Acto blade, and then I use the watered Mod Podge to kind of give it that wash effect, but a very heavy wash where you can deep it in the crevices and spread it out with your finger. I like to use my finger, as I think the oils in your hands kind of really rub it in. So I started with some gray chalk for all the crevices. I feel like it matched the reference photos best with a more gray. And then I come in with a black chalk and I make all these scorch marks. You can go as far as you would like with this weathering process, but I like to tell a story with all my helmets. I like them beat and battered. That's just my preference, but it's entirely up to you on how clean you want this. And I love the airborne troopers. They're incredibly dirty in Revenge of the Sith. I mean, they're in the 212th. They're on the front lines. They are very dirty, which I just think is so cool. I love how dirty the helmets are in Revenge of the Sith, really showing the end of the war and how dirty and grimy these guys are. And so I like to really show that with some rust on all the details, such as the vents and the aerators on the front. So I just take a orange chalk and a brown chalk and I mix them together, and I kind of just wipe this in all the crevices with my fingers, and it gives that really end of the war lived in look to it. Lastly, to finish up the helmet, we just have to put in a visor, which I'm using a Hobart face shield, which I traced on the inside with some paper and then just cut it out, and this helmet is all ready to be shown off. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. This helmet's been on my list of props to make for a long time, so I'm really happy I got to make it, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next one.